Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a file that, well, it suggests one of the big foundational economies of Western Europe is facing a crisis, a really staggering one.
And the interesting thing is the source of the shock. The material we have says it's not internal.
No, it's
It,
a geopolitical earthquake, basically, and it's being triggered thousands of miles away in West Africa.
we're looking at a stack of source material today, making a pretty extraordinary claim that the economic stability of France, which has been maintained for, what, over 5 decades,
Right.
has been directly undercut by a really decisive shift in its former colonies.
Mm.
So our mission here is to understand the exact mechanics the sources allege France used.
The mechanics of that arrangement and the massive fallout that's supposedly happening right now, that the system is crumbling.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources suggest a direct causal link, claiming France is now facing consequences for decades of, well, the material calls it a deep structural dependency.
Right. The claim is that this long-standing financial lifeline was just abruptly severed.
By a handful of African nations.
Exactly. And when that happened, the economic structure that was built on it was, instantly exposed as being fundamentally unsustainable.
And the evidence for that shock, I suppose, is the numbers coming out of Paris right now. The figures in these sources are genuinely staggering.
Mm-hmm.
They say France is drowning in a national debt deficit of 3.34 trillion euros.
That figure alone is, it demands attention. But what makes the source material so alarming is what it says about the speed of this debt.
The velocity, yeah.
It's allegedly growing by nearly 5,000 euros every single second.
Wow.
So this isn't some slow economic decline. The sources are painting a picture of a sudden financial hemorrhage, and they're linking it directly to these recent events in West Africa.
So we have to start with the mechanics of this alleged dependency. The sources keep using this phrase, free money. For over 50 years, they claim, France's economy was kept afloat by this. But what does that actually look like?
Well, the sources detail a system that's more than just simple resource deals. It's a three-pronged system of formalized dependency.
Okay.
And the first, and maybe the most shocking part, is what they call the mandatory revenue transfer.
Yes, that figure it's almost unbelievable. The sources say 14 African nations were, and I'm quoting, forced into a post-colonial agreement. And it involved sending up to 80% of their yearly national revenues straight to the French treasury in Paris.
And when you really stop and think about that 80% figure, it makes you completely redefine what the sources mean by dependency.
Right. It implies these nations were sustaining the colonial power's economy, not just trading with it.
Exactly. The material portrays it as mandated extraction, something that fundamentally limited the ability of those 14 states to fund their own infrastructure, their own healthcare, their own security.
But it wasn't just cash. It was also about currency and resources. Let's get into that second layer, monetary control.
Yeah.
The sources say France was printing currencies for almost 45 African nations.
This is a key point. The sources talk about a currency zone structure. If France is printing the currencies and then mandating that a percentage of their foreign reserves be held in the French central bank, it gives them this immense silent leverage.
That's the term, silent leverage. It lets France effectively control the monetary policy of those nations, ensuring their economies stayed, well, compliant with French needs.
And then the third layer is the physical resources. This connects directly to that huge number that claimed $1 trillion annual extraction figure.
Yes.
The sources are pretty blunt. They say France built its economy off uranium it didn't mine, lights it didn't pay for, and power from a land whose people, they claim, still live in the dark.
Exactly. So you combine the resources and the revenue transfers, and that's how you get to the scale of this alleged lifeline. The source material estimates the total value France was extracting through currency control, revenue transfers, and resource deals.
Yeah.
Was nearly $1 trillion every single year. From Africa, that's the size of the pipeline they claim is now closed. Which brings us to the breaking point. If that system was in place for so long, what finally broke it?
The sources describe it as the answer to a prayer many African nations have been waiting for. It was a swift and seemingly coordinated transition.
We've seen countries just actively cutting ties, expelling the French presence, both military and economic.
Right. The material specifically names Mali, Burkina Faso, which it cites as Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and Senegal. They've all decisively cut off Paris.
And some of those actions had these really immediate critical consequences. I mean, Niger saying no to the uranium supply
A huge deal.
that allegedly fueled a huge chunk of French energy production.
Yeah.
And then you have Mali and Burkina Faso just looking France in the eye and saying, you're not welcome here.
The authors of the source material, they use this very powerful analogy to describe the power shift.
That's that.
They claim France is losing because, and this is a direct quote, the abused wife stopped cooking for you. She realized she was the source of your strength.
That's a very pointed way to frame it. The idea that the alleged victim was actually the provider all along.
It reframes the entire relationship.
So with this lifeline, this claimed $1 trillion a year gone, what is the direct, massive fallout in France, according to the sources?
We have to circle right back to those economic numbers. The sources claim the sudden removal of this funding is the main driver behind that 3.34 trillion euro deficit just ballooning.
So the analysis is that the entire economy, without its silent subsidy, is now just structurally weak.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And the French government's response, as detailed in the sources, was a 50 billion euro budget cut.
An attempt at triage.
Right, to start paying down those debts. And that immediately triggered huge citizen strikes and protests across the country.
Which brings up a really important question the source material gets into. Does the French public understand where the problem is coming from?
Well, the sources claim they don't. They allege that citizens are striking, demanding the money back, but they don't realize that the money being cut.
Well, it was the free money from Africa.
Exactly, the hidden source of their historical stability. So they're demanding the government restore funds that, according to this analysis, simply no longer exist.
And the sources are pretty clear that the 50 billion cut is just the start, because that historical funding source is gone permanently.
And we connect this to the bigger picture. The sources argue this isn't just a story about France. It suggests the entire post-colonial economic system is crumbling, and the cracks are now out in the open.
Yeah, the sources broaden the view to all of Europe. They say the continent is paying the price for decades of dependency on Africa.
And they single out the United Kingdom specifically.
They do, warning that it's staring down the same path. They point to the UK leaning heavily on Nigeria.
And the claim is, if Nigeria follows the path of Niger and Mali and pushes back, Britain could face a similar or maybe even worse collapse.
It's framed as a global reckoning for Western nations that, and again I'm quoting the sources, built their empires off of unpaid labor and unpaid bills.
It's a fundamental challenge to the economic foundation of several major powers.
Now, let's flip this around. Let's look at the new posture coming from the African continent that's detailed in the sources.
A huge part of the story.
The perspective is shifting. Africa, the sources claim, is realizing it is the plug. It's the minerals, the sun, the food, and ultimately the future.
And this new mindset is driving a very clear call to action in the material. It's not just about nationalizing assets anymore. It's about, as they put it, to imagine everything.
Meaning,
when they sit at global tables, BRICS, the African Union, with China, with India, they must negotiate. Like, the world will stop spinning without us because it will.
So it's framed as a demand for respect, not revenge, coming from a new generation that's rising up to abolish these old alleged agreements.
Yeah, demanding to be treated as essential partners, not supplicants.
Right.
And it raises a huge question about whether global economic power can fundamentally shift when the source of critical resources just changes its posture.
So let's just summarize the central narrative here from the sources. The sudden removal of this alleged revenue and resource pipeline has directly exposed French economic vulnerability.
Right, and it's accelerated this massive, immediate financial crisis.
And the sources leave the West with a pretty stark question about this whole system.
They do. They ask, what was your long-term plan? Did you think Africa was going to let you plunder forever?
Looking ahead, the source material offers one final, stark prediction. It claims that without its former colonies as a financial subsidy, France will be one of the poorest nations in Europe.
Within 20 years.
Yeah.
So the ultimate question for you, the listener, based on this interpretation is this. Is the economic fallout in France just a temporary market adjustment? Or is it evidence that the foundations of these post-colonial economies were always unsustainable, always unethical, and that we're seeing the start of a total overhaul of global